Alrighty, fans, we are back. UT has a pretty commanding lead at this point. Montana just, they've actually had some good plays against the Vols, but Montana just doesn't have what it takes to run with them at this point.
I'm hoping it's the first game thing. I'm not particularly happy with the way they played the second half. So as of now, it scored 7 points on offense in the second half. They've not been able to run the ball all night. Earlier they were averaging 2.2 yards a carry. That's not going to cut it for the season.
Give up a safety is a bad thing too.
I'd say Montana's not a terrible team, and Tennessee shouldn't have trouble moving the ball against them. And they've struggled in the second half with it pretty bad. And they're playing, it's not like they're playing the backups, they've been playing starters through the whole second half.
Right.
You know, we'll just have to see if it's the first game, maybe it'll improve. I mean,
Cincinnati's going to be a much bigger test than Montana was, I would think.
You would think Cincinnati will. Cincinnati's probably going to just, play against the pass and make Tennessee run the ball. And I'm surprised the offensive line, I thought it would be a pretty strong suit. They've been handled by Montana's defensive front as far as trying to run the ball.
Yeah, the offensive line should be a strength now with all the experience among them.
Big guys, but Montana's stood toe-to-toe with them, and like I say, they were holding to 2.2 yards a carry. That's not going to cut it. You need to average 4 yards a carry to be a successful football team, 3.5 to 4 yards anyway.
And that's
the season.
We're going to come up against some tough defenses down the road.
Like I said, I'm hoping this is first game jitters. You had the big, hour and 40-minute lightning delay. There's no telling what that. But the Vols look good. Pretty good the first half. They had a really long drive, 12 play, I think, or 13 plays. It took about 7 minutes off. Had some big touchdowns, some quick hitters, but second half they just came out kind of flat. And as of now, they had the interception run back for a touchdown and one offensive touchdown. They may score before the game's over. I'm not sure, but we decided to go ahead and shoot. But I would have been more impressed if the offense had been a little more consistent.
Now, some other news. Boise State's at 21-7 on Georgia at the moment.
Kind of surprising to see that. I compared Mark Richt to Fulmer earlier. I could have saw Tennessee in that situation with Boise State. Or any top 5 team. Fulmer was very good against top 5 teams. Georgia's got better athletes and better football players and should be able to keep that game closer than that. Especially playing in the Georgia Dome, basically a home game for them.
And of course, over in Dallas, LSU's got a slight edge on Oregon at the moment. They're about 3 points.
That's just a clash of two top 5 teams. Oregon's got a lot of speed on their team. You got true speedy defenses in the SEC though, and we didn't have that last year. We had a very slow defense last year, and it showed against Oregon and a bunch of other teams. They play against Auburn, they play against LSU, and it shows. They bottomed out. I think they scored 13 points last time, just 16-13 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That 50-point a game offense, when it comes up against a true SEC top caliber defense like LSU Auburn, it sputters.
Now, another big one today, South Carolina, who was at one point at the half in a really tight game, was just reeling off the points.
They were doing 28-14 at halftime and scored 21 points in the first 4.5 minutes of the third quarter.
And I think they've scored again since then.
So, they're playing East Carolina, not a really good team, but some people thought East Carolina would be decent this year. That sets up a big showdown in the SEC East next week. Georgia may be coming off a loss against Boise. Played South Carolina, that game will go a long way to determine who wins the Eastern Conference Championship.
And that's probably going to be the game of the week next week, I would think.
I believe they were picked 1 and 2 in the conference in the Eastern Division of the SEC, so that will put a huge leg up for the winner of that game.
Yeah, it's gonna be a big one next week. Also, speaking of other SEC football, how terrible is Kentucky?
I don't understand. Why are they playing in Nashville?
That was Western Kentucky.
That's technically Western Kentucky's home game.
Western Kentucky plays in Nashville?
Well, it's like Wyoming and Tennessee a few years ago. Wyoming's home game was in Nashville.
Basically, is it LP Field now?
It was, LP. I'm not sure if that's when they're playing. They're playing at Vanderbilt.
They're playing at the Titans Stadium.
It's, basically, they scheduled a home and home in Western Kentucky, and
The National Tourism Committee made it worth Western Kentucky's
they're
while.
not gonna go to play in Western Kentucky's 20,000 seat stadium, so they decided they would, have the game in Nashville.
It's sort of the same thing with LSU and Oregon playing in Dallas. It's a
But
tourist
Kentucky-
community.
Kentucky is terrible, so,
Yeah, they averaged 4 yards in the first half.
I mean, they're not gonna have, Randall Cobb was their team almost last year, and with him gone, it'll be the same old Kentucky, they might win 3 or 4 games, you never know, 5 maybe.
Florida looks like they're going to pick up Will Muschamp's first win as coach, because they're playing Florida International.
Yeah, it's a typical week for a lot of teams. You like Tennessee's probably gonna win 42-16 or something like that, and a lot of teams are playing, weaker teams to start the season.
Ole Miss,
Ole Miss lost to BYU.
not their strongest showing.
That doesn't surprise me any. I was actually surprised it was as close as it was, and Ole Miss's defense did a pretty good job in the game. I picked them in the picks contest this week, BYU, because they usually have a good passing offense. Ole Miss's defense was frankly awful last year. I expected them to get, blown out, or at least give up a lot of points and maybe score a lot of points, but I didn't expect it to be that kind of low scoring game. But BYU won 14-13. I expected them to win, but I expected it to be a little bit more of a shootout kind of game than that.
So next week, we mentioned Georgia and South Carolina. It's still not a lot of big games this early in the season.
They're two big legendary names in football. Alabama and Penn State play next week. Penn State, they're still waiting on Joe Pa to play out the string and I guess possibly die on the field, whatever he plans on doing, before their program will actually truly start to recover. Penn State, they got a win today over Indiana State or somebody like that. That's no indication of how good. I mean, Alabama won 48-7
Over Kent State.
somebody terrible like that.
Yeah.
Somebody along those lines. I expect Alabama will probably win over Penn State, maybe even dominate them.
Can't imagine saying that a few years back.
Well, they had some great battles back in the 80s, and it just would come down to goal line stand. Alabama had to make 2 goal line stands for a win, late in Bear Bryant's career against Penn State, considered one of the greatest games of all time. I hate Alabama, I wish they'd lost, but they managed to stop 4 plays on the goal line 2 different times to preserve their win that time. That's kind of a pretty legendary college football game. It's just 2 huge names. I said that we talked about Georgia, South Carolina. There's Auburn, Mississippi State play next week.
It's a pretty big game in the West.
Most people think LSU and Alabama, they're the best teams in the West, but that'll go a long way to determine who finishes 2nd or 3rd in the West.
And Mississippi State dominated whoever it was they
They
played.
played Memphis on Thursday and won 59-20. Memphis is, frankly, they're awful. I mean, I would pick Montana in the game against Memphis. Memphis is terrible on football. There's not a lot of really, huge matchups next week. Pretty good ones. This week had a better one. That LSU Oregon game, I had a conference 2 top 5 teams, pretty hard to top.
Away from what's currently going on, looking towards the future, Texas A&M has officially told the Big 12 Conference they're out.
Yeah, and I'm almost certain that's just a formality that they will be in the SEC. And apparently big news too, Oklahoma's informed the Big 12 over the next couple of weeks that they're going to be looking at options.
You think they wind up in the SEC?
You would think they would. Culturally, they're similar to a Southeastern Conference.
A lot of people love their football in Oklahoma.
The Pac-12, I guess it would be now, will probably look at them. They'll shop themselves around, I suspect. I mean, I don't think that they'll be able to get a better financial package than they will in the SEC. Their culture, part of the country, Oklahoma and Texas and that area were settled by people from Tennessee and some other parts of the South for the most part. They're culturally the same and similar in football, much more in common with the Southeast than they are people in California and Washington and Oregon. Frankly, they're closer to a lot of the Southeast than Washington, California, and Oregon. It would make the most sense. The biggest problem is Oklahoma wants to win championship games.
That ain't gonna happen.
that's not going to be anywhere close to as easy if they come to the SEC. And they'll now in the Big 12 they pretty much have to play Texas, and whoever wins that's going to win the Big 12 almost every year. And they like that path of least resistance. I pointed out in the Vols watch this past week. They played for years in the Big 8 conference, and it was known as Oklahoma and the Seven Dwarfs. They won about 12 conference championships in a row. Finally, Nebraska emerged in the late 60s and early 70s and started giving them competition. But it was Oklahoma and the Seven Dwarfs for decades.
I also had a conversation with one of Norris's coaches that I was talking about earlier about the possibility that the SEC becomes a 20-team super conference in the relatively near future. Virginia and Virginia Tech in particular were brought up because apparently in Virginia there's a law on the books that if Virginia Tech changes conference, Virginia has to change to the same conference, and vice versa.
Well, there supposedly was that, but that didn't really happen, and Virginia Tech got left out of the ACC when they originally formed. When the ACC came around, Virginia Tech kind of got shafted out of that. You know, there was a big brouhaha in the legislature about getting Virginia Tech finally into the ACC this time. We won't see 20 teams. I'd say 16 will be the maximum you'll ever see in the conference. And there, you know,
It almost eliminates non-conference matchups is one of the problems.
they would have to take a non-conference game off and add another SEC game, or it'd be pointless to have that many teams in the conference because you, frankly, if you play 8 games and you play 7 against your division and then 1 against the other division, well, that would end a lot of rivalry. That would end Tennessee and Alabama. That would never be stood for, in my opinion.
I can't imagine that either. I mean,
so the only way to do it, you have to go to 9 games, and you have to play 7 in your division, your permanent Western rival, and then 1 rotating. Otherwise, you know, if you just made it 7 games and 1 permanent Western rival,
you never see the rest of the way.
you're just going to play Alabama and never see another game against Auburn, LSU. You never see the new teams. I would rather it not go to that length just because of that. You know, you get 14, you can have, you know, your 6 games against the division, still have 2 against the other division. 1 permanent, 1 rotating. You won't get to see Texas A&M or Oklahoma, whoever that often if they come. But you will get to see them every few years. Or you could even add a game still to that and could do a 6-3 format. But regardless, if it went 16 teams, I would almost hope they split it in 4 divisions.
Now, how would that work playoff-wise, do you think?
They would just have to have the 2 teams, you know, basically the playoff, and then the 2 teams that emerge from that would play in the SEC championship. You know, they'd have an SEC semifinal and an SEC final. That may happen if every team goes to 16 conference team. It would be like Pac-16, Big 16, or Big 10. They would keep that name to be 16 teams. The SEC and the ACC, the Big East and the Big 12 will most likely not exist anymore. And you probably have Texas and Notre Dame still be. And Texas is probably going independent. Notre Dame will stay independent, obviously.
Now, I actually, probably be writing about Texas this week in my column, so stay tuned for that. It probably is not going to please many Texas fans. But
their greed has torn that conference down. They tore the Southwestern Conference apart. That's why Arkansas left the Southwestern Conference. It was, you know, you get all those schools in Texas that are willing to basically kowtow Texas, and then you have Arkansas. Arkansas felt they always got the short end of it because all those other teams would vote with Texas for everything. So Arkansas left and went to the SEC. All the other Texas teams were cheating constantly like crazy. You know, you had Texas ended up on major probation back in the 90s, and of course SMU was got the death penalty. Just a lot of bad stuff was going on back there in the Texas schools with those Texas boosters. They take their football pretty serious, so they'll go in and do anything to win.
they do. I mean, Texas high school football is pretty crazy stuff.
But you get all that. Texas, they signed that $300 million contract. You knew that wasn't going to fly with the rest of the Big 12. I mean, some of the teams are willing to take it because they're just desperate, but they really, like Kansas, where's Kansas going to go?
Yeah.
They got a great basketball program. You think that's attractive, but their basketball generates a few $1 million a year, but nothing like football will generate on a popular service.
Football's where the money's at.
So football drives all this. You know, they're worried, people on the Kansas message boards, that they'll have to either join the Big East, which may also be failing, or join the Mountain West Conference and become a non-BCS school in football. It's just left a lot of teams at lurch, so a lot of teams are just willing to take less money and just hold on to Texas as much as they can. Texas A&M got tired of that.
Yeah, because I mean, once you back out of those BCS conferences, you talk about just restriction of cash flow.
It's a pretty big difference. I mean, it's not as much difference in this. Montana's coach, I was reading an article this week about Montana's coach. He said their program makes $64,000 a game. And Tennessee's makes about $7 million a game.
That's a little bit of a jump. So they probably made more this game coming to UT as they will all year.
They were charging $350,000 this game.
That's pretty good.
Also, kind of getting away from NCAA football on the NAIA level, got to give a big congratulations to Phillip Wells. He had his first ever college start today with the University of the Cumberlands. They won handily and running that triple option, had about 400 yards on the ground.
Great to see a local guy making good at the next level.
You know, I'm proud of Phillip. I mean, Luke and I coached him. He was literally the last group I ever coached. You had one group after that, didn't you?
Well, it was
Same group. You were
same
just there the whole year.
I was just, yeah.
That just shows a lot of the local kids. If you actually take your football seriously here in high school, or any other sport you want to take seriously, you can probably get a scholarship offer somewhere.
Oh yeah. You know, Steve and his twin brothers with him.
Troy Arnold's there.
Keenan Evans is up there. Keenan, coming off a foot injury, had to sit out this week. I just, you know, among that, here's some other scholarship athletes, just University of Cumberland's. Brittany Bostick's a cheerleader up there. Courtney Ward, until an injury happened, was running track up there. So, I mean, you know, it's not. Bethany Meredith is throwing for the track team this year. Keenan will be a dual sport athlete there.
It's a free education. You can't beat it.
We also have athletes like Carson Newman.
Right.
Do we still have some at Maryville?
I think our last Maryville athlete graduated last year.
You're right.
I'm not sure we don't have somebody at Tusculum right now.
We might, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, there's plenty of opportunity for local athletes if they take their sports seriously. You know, we've got Jessica Moore at Campbell University in the Carolinas.
So, the thought that came around, you know, mid-90s was steady on is still a popular thought that you have to go to another school to get looked at is not true. If you come out, you play your best, you will get looked at by colleges at Campbell County High School.
Coaches are beating the bushes for any athlete they can find, and they find them from Campbell County all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're not going to go, I'm going to use Oak Ridge for an example. You're not going to transfer from here and go to Oak Ridge and get looked at anymore because they're going to look at those pretty much Division I type athletes that are already at Oak Ridge. If you're good enough to play, you're going to get looked at, be it here, Cumberland Gap, Wartburg, Jellicoe. Jellicoe has a native that's wearing a national championship ring from UT.
You know, frankly, if you're good enough to play Division I football,
They will find
you're going to get found by somebody.
Especially now with the internet.
The internet has made it. I mean, you got the Knoxville stations are keeping up with just about every team's stats right now.
Oh yeah.
ESPN is
ESPN Rise is huge.
On Rise, they're keeping up with it. The coaches are taking up. They're looking at those websites and seeing, and then they'll see who's looks like making good strides and efforts, and they will come and watch you play, whether you're here or somewhere else.
Absolutely. So next time you see Al Gore, thank him for inventing the internet.
That's right.
Fans, I think that's going to do it for this week's Sports Chat. We'll be back next week with some reports on the Cougars-Carnes matchup and all that's going on in local and national sports.